we've got smoking gun evidence that they actually changed the laws and they are actually plotting a monumental heist.
The skeptical side of me was like, this cannot be possibly true. Sure enough, man, this is irrefutable. This is bulletproof. All of our assets, all of our securities can be legally taken in the event that the custodian were to fail. Alex, it's great to see you again.
Great to be with you, Andrew. Great to see you again. Beverly Hills was fun, so thank you. And really enjoyed our conversation then. Looking forward to the movie.
You've been studying institutional fraud, financial fraud, malpractice, things like that for years. And you obviously are aware of this great taking concept. What was your reaction when you first heard about the great taking?
When I first heard about this concept of the great taking, it sounded really implausible. And you're right, I've been studying this stuff for almost 20 years now. I know that there are very bad actors who seek to liberate our money from us and take our freedoms from us. You know, I've been following these people and these institutions for literally decades now. But this just sounded too bold. The idea that they were going to somehow try to confiscate our securities, our stocks, our bonds. It just sounded like too much. But when I got a phone call from some guys I knew at one of the top conservative think tanks in America, and they said, no, Alex, we actually have looked at the laws in 3 Republican states and 3 Democrat states, and the laws have in fact been changed, just like David Webb is saying in his book, The Great Taking. I thought, okay, this is actually a serious issue. I really need to dig into this. So I got in touch with David Webb and started digging into this, got in touch with some of the lawmakers who were looking at this and realized, wow, it is real. And that's stunning for me because, you know, like I said, I've followed these people for long enough that I don't put almost anything past them, but this just seemed too breathtaking. But here we are. We've got smoking gun evidence that they actually changed the laws and they are actually plotting a monumental heist. I'm curious about your experience, Andrew. I mean, you as a financial expert, as a fiduciary, I mean, how did you feel when you first uncovered this? I mean, you found out that this is what was going on. I mean, you tried to disprove it. What did you find?
I'll never forget it. It was actually May of 2025. I was in Santa Monica for a mastermind, and I was flying home. I was in LAX. It was early morning, and you know, I had my AirPods in, my coffee, and I'm going through YouTube, and I come across this interview with David Webb, and he's saying how all of our assets, all of our securities can be legally taken in the event that the custodian were to fail. That just shocked me because, you know, we have a pretty large retirement planning firm headquartered out of Nashville. We obviously serve nationwide, but I mean, that was scary. So I started looking into it further, and I almost never buy Wi-Fi on the plane. I just think it's a ripoff. But I bought Wi-Fi that day, and I started going through as much content as I possibly could, and I ended up coming across Stop It, The Great Taking, which James Patrick had put out, and it shocked me to my core because it documented a legal battle that took place in my hometown of Nashville with Bud Holsey. And that just got my wheels turning. I had a hard time sleeping that night. And one thing led to another, and as I started talking to these legislators and these attorneys, sure enough, man, this is irrefutable. This is bulletproof. The skeptical side of me was like, this cannot be possibly true. This is like, you know, tinfoil hat conspiratorial. Like, I thought Alex Jones was on another level. No, this is like on a whole other level entirely. This is another planet of conspiracy, but it's actually true. And I think it was Adolf Hitler who said, it's far easier to convince the masses of a big lie than a small one. And it's true. I mean, this is about the biggest lie that you could possibly perpetuate, and we've bought it. A lot of people are not aware of it. So, you know, that obviously is what compelled me to invest as much money as I've invested into this film. It's been very expensive. We've got a lot of experts in it, but I think it's going to blow the whistle on what is actually the case for people's hard-earned savings, and then also practically what they can do, because right now, unfortunately, the way things are set up, we tried to fix it recently. I went to war with the bank lobby here in Tennessee and I lost, you know. For the 3rd year in a row, we lost. But until this is changed at the local level, one state will be the linchpin, I believe. But But until it's changed, our money's vulnerable of being taken.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's funny hearing you describe your reaction, because that's actually the same reaction I've had from a lot of our viewers who are in the financial realm. It's the reaction we've had from a lot of people who've heard me on radio. I've had radio hosts contact me and say, hey, Alex, I was glad to have you on the program, but this financial expert contacted me and says that can't possibly be true and you're just making stuff up. So I've put together several emails now just showing these guys where they can go find the information. But Andrew, before we go any deeper here, there are probably people listening to us who aren't really familiar with what all of this means. Uniform Commercial Code, Article 8. Like, what are you guys even talking about? How is that all going to lead to them stealing my financial assets? So why don't you walk us through just briefly, if you would, what does it mean, this change that they've made in the UCC around the country, and what are the mechanics of how this great taking, this heist would work? If push comes to shove. So
they made some very small little tweaks, but what it did in essence, and I'm not an attorney, I'm not a very sharp, financial guy, I'm a simple guy. And I think that's why our company has done so well, as I speak in simple terms. But the long and short of it is that they gave priority to the bank or the custodian. Now, a custodian is simply like a Fidelity, Schwab, Raymond James, Merrill Lynch, Ameriprise. They're just a holder of securities. So if the custodian or the bank were to go insolvent, they would be the first to get paid back before we would. There's a metaphor that I've been using with different clients. It's probably the easiest one to explain this. So imagine if you're gonna go buy yourself a new Lexus, right? And you're excited, you've been saving for months, and you get all the cash, and you go to the Lexus dealer and you pick out your Lexus, you pay for it in cash, you sign the paperwork, you're driving home, and it feels so good, it's so smooth, and it smells so great. And you get home, you park it in the car, you're so excited because you're gonna go on a road trip the next day with your new car. You go to sleep, you wake up the next morning, you look out the window, and the Lexus is gone. And you're freaking out, and you're like, oh my gosh, you call the Lexus dealer, and you say, guys, we have a problem. My Lexus has been stolen. And they're like, well, actually, you did pay for it outright. It is your property, but by you coming to our dealer and you signing this paperwork, whether you knew it or not, you actually gave us the ability to pledge your Lexus as collateral for some risky bets that we wanted to do as a dealership. And we did those risky bets, and it didn't go our way. We're going insolvent, and that third party, yeah, they took your Lexus as collateral, and there's nothing you can do about it. Sorry. And you're like, what the heck, dude? This is illegal. You can't do this. Well, actually, it's 100% legal, because look at the paperwork you signed. Or it wasn't you that signed it, it was your local legislator that signed it. That is exactly how it works with our finances, with our money if it's invested in a bank or custodian. Because what happens is, when you give a bank or custodian your money, they take your money and it becomes pooled through the DTC, the Depository Trust Company out of New York. And there's over 800 different banks and custodians that use the DTC. Now, once it's pooled at the DTC, we are no longer the private property holder. So back in the day, Alex, if you, let's say, had $1 million at Fidelity, and it was in Oracle stock, let's say. And I had $1 million at Fidelity in Oracle stock as well. Well, back in the day, we had our own little certificate. That was our private property. It was physical, it was tangible. Well, when they digitalized everything and they changed some of these laws, now what happens is when the Oracle stock is pooled at the DTC, we are no longer the private property holder. We are what's called an entitlement holder. We have a pro rata interest in that stock. Now, everything's groovy, everything's fine as long as Fidelity doesn't go sideways. But if Fidelity decides, you know what, we want to grow our business. We want to engage in some derivatives contracts or some options contracts or some speculative bets, or we need a bigger loan. And you have another party, like let's say a JP Morgan, that steps in and says to Fidelity, no problem, Fidelity. We'll fulfill the options contract. We'll fulfill the derivatives contract. We'll give you a loan, but we are going to need some collateral. Now, what is Fidelity going to use as collateral? They're going to use your and my private Oracle stock. Now again, as long as the bets pay off, Fidelity gets to keep the profits. But if the bets don't pay off and Fidelity goes insolvent, that is where our assets can be legally taken because of the way the rules are written in the Uniform Commercial Code in Article 8. Now, again, it sounds ridiculous, except for it's happened over 100 times in our country already. We're documenting this in the movie, all the different legal battles. Conservatively, tens of billions of dollars has been stolen, and plausibly upwards of over 100 billion has been taken in these different court cases. The biggest example was Lehman Brothers. And it went through bankruptcy law, and a lot of those accounts were frozen for 14 years and 13 days, which is wild. Can you imagine if your money was frozen, you were retiring and your money was frozen for 14 years? Some of them were paid back, some of them were made whole, but some of them weren't. And that at the time, and I talked about this at the legislative branch here in Nashville, and I was competing, with the bank lobby to try to get this bill passed to put the priority rights, the precedent back on Tennessee residents, where we'd get paid back first if the custodian or bank were to fail. Well, one of the things I talked about was with the TARP program. So back in September of 2008, Lehman Brothers failed. 2 weeks later, we came up with the TARP program. And what we did is we printed $700 billion and we bailed out the very rascal banks that got us into that mess to begin with. We infused capital into the banks to stop the contagion, to stop the dominoes from falling, to stop the failures of these banks and custodians, because they were failing left and right. And so when we did that, though, we had room on the credit card. We only had about 10 trillion in government debt. Well, you fast forward to today, we're at 39 trillion. They're saying that within 5 years, 50 cents of every dollar that we bring in tax revenue is just going to go to the interest expense alone on our debt. And within 10 years, 100 cents of every dollar that we bring in tax revenue is just going to go to the interest expense alone on our debt. We have no room on the credit card to bail ourselves out if there were to be a widespread custodial collapse. So the first part of this film is talking about, hey, there is 100% a back-end plumbing creation of this Uniform Commercial Code that will take away our money legally. But the middle part of the film is, well, what is the economic conditions in which a widespread custodial collapse might happen? And that's where we talk about the coming Great Depression. Now, we believe, and we talk about this in the film, ITR Economics, they're the oldest privately owned macroeconomics firm in the country. They have a 94.7% accuracy ratio at all their different predictions across the country, 4 quarters out and beyond. They post whether they're right or wrong online. They own it if they're wrong. But they've been saying since 2014 that around 2030, there's going to be a Great Depression. Now, I'll talk about that in a bit if you like, but I know you're very aware, you've got obviously your ear to the ground on this coming crisis, but does your time frame at all line up with that 2030 year?
Well, the year 2030 is very significant for a number of reasons, and so I think there's beyond just the economic data that we can all look at, there's a lot of other evidence that strongly suggests something big is coming on or before 2030. I'll point people first and foremost to the World Economic Forum. A few years ago, they put out their famous list of predictions that by 2030 these things would happen, and the very first one on there was that you would own nothing and would be happy. I'm not sure about where they get the happy idea from, but the whole concept of owning nothing actually lines up very well with what we know some of these deep state operatives want. And so I covered them extensively in my upcoming book, Deep State 2.0. The World Economic Forum is not just a talk shop. These are some of the most powerful economic players in the world, powerful government officials in the world. And when they talk about predictions, they shouldn't be thought of so much as just predictions, like, oh, we're just looking at trends and forecasting what's going to come. I think a better way to think of it is kind of a wish list. And they've got very smart people like who do this for a living. And one of the things that they work on is coming up with different plausible scenarios for where things could go. And then with those plausible scenarios, they try to steer things toward the outcome that they want. And so I think the fact that an economic crisis of enormous proportions is baked into the cake should be obvious to everybody. The debt that you were just talking about, the issue with the dollar continually losing its purchasing power. The massive amounts, not just of government debt, but personal debt and corporate debt and municipal debt. I mean, we're facing multiple crises happening at the same time. And so with those crises already baked into the cake, these people at the World Economic Forum are figuring, well, what do we want to do with this crisis? And they understand, of course, that crises are good opportunities. As Rahm Emanuel said, former chief of staff to Barack Obama, former mayor of Chicago, these are opportunities to do things that you couldn't do before, like maybe take people's stuff. And so I think the year 2030, I think, is very significant. And then when you look at who designed these institutions, who designed these policies, some very suspicious characters come up. Obviously, William Dentzel, who set up the DTC, the Depository Trust Company that holds all these securities, is a very suspicious individual. His background was, of course, with the Central Intelligence Agency. After the CIA, he went and started the USAID, which was basically a front for the Central Intelligence Agency. And then he gets appointed by a Rockefeller. Remember that name, because these people have their fingers in every pie. Gets appointed by a Rockefeller, the governor of New York, to a very, very prominent position in banking and regulation. And from there, he uses that as a springboard to then become the key player in designing this whole system that we're talking about, the DTC, the stocks in pooled form, and all the rest of it. So I think when you look at where they're going with this, we've got a lot of strong clues about it. One book that I think is really important for people who want to try to understand this, it's called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. It was written by a professor at Georgetown University, a professor of history, and he brags in the book that he's been close to the deep state all his life, that he has good relationships with these people, that they even allowed him to look at their secret papers for a period of a few years. And he says, I agree with their goals. He says, my chief difference of opinion is that they want to be secret, and I think their role in history is so important that they ought to be known to the public. And so he writes these books and kind of burns his bridges. They get really mad at him. But one of the things that he describes as their overarching objective in this book is the creation of a global political and economic system that he says would be based on the feudalist model. And if you remember the feudalist model from 8th grade civics or history, whatever, it is you own nothing. I don't know if you're gonna be happy or not, but basically your overlords own everything, and they might allow you to occupy a little piece of farmland as long as you hand over 50% of your crops and you hand over your children when the king needs them to go off to a war, but you ultimately own nothing. You are a serf. And I think this neo-feudalistic model that they're building has that as the end objective. All the resources of the world, the stocks, the bonds, the productive assets of the world, and of course the natural resources as well, all concentrated into a tiny group of hands. And so in this book, Carroll Quigley gives a lot of the mechanics of how they're going to do this. He gives a lot of the people involved, a lot of the institutions. He mocks the idea of two different parties in the political process representing opposite ideals. He said they ought to be so close to each other that we can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound shifts in policy. And when you read this book, and this was published back in the 1960s, you get a real sense of where these people want to take the system, where the people who appointed William Dentzel to create the DTC want to have this all end up. And it really does look like the year 2030 is going to be a major year. It's also the year that the UN 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals, which the UN called the Master Plan for Humanity, officially expires to be replaced by what I'm hearing from my sources is going to be the resilience goals. And so why would you need resilience? Well, because you're facing what the World Economic Forum has described as a polycrisis. It's not just the economic crisis, but all these other crises, geopolitical, maybe civil unrest, environmental concerns, all converging into this super polycrisis that the World Economic Forum says is coming, and would be perfect cover for basically looting humanity's assets.
That's a great point. Never let a good crisis go to waste. One of the things that we talked about in our movie, which I thought was interesting. So I'm sure you obviously know about The Fourth Turning and Neil Howe's book, and I think it's a great book, but it only goes back a handful of centuries, so just I think 300 or 400 years. And there are some exceptions in his model. There's another book called Pendulum. And I don't know if you've heard of this or not, Alex, but this is from Roy H. Williams. He's actually the highest paid advertiser in the world, and he's been the highest paid advertiser in the world for 25 years due to how he gets compensated. But as a highly paid advertiser, he picks up on patterns. He picks up on human behaviors. And he noticed these two different 40-year periods that go back and forth, back and forth. He actually went back and researched 3,000 years. So Neil Howe with the Fourth Turning only went back about 400. He went back 3,000 years to Solomon's time, and he noticed there was always two subsequent 40-year periods or generations, right? So generations in the Bible is mentioned 52, 54 times, and it's always referring to 40 years, right? A generation. Well, what he came up with, which is absolutely fascinating, he's in the movie, but you have the 40-year me generation followed by a 40-year we generation. And you can see this show up in the media if it's more recent. You can see it show up in the architecture. You could see it show up in the music or the art. You could see it show up in the leadership. You could even see it show up in various big events. The me generation's obviously focused on me. What am I going to get out of it? My expression. Whereas the we generation is focused on the collective good. And it's interesting because the reason why history repeats itself is because the people who went through what we're going through last time are no longer here to tell us about it because it was 80 years ago. What's so fascinating is the 10-year upswing to the peak or the zenith of a we generation and the 10-year downswing. This 20-year period out of the 80 is where all of the viciousness is. It's where all of the rage, all of the wars, World War II, Civil War, Revolutionary War, the Crusades, the burning at the stake, the Salem witch trials, the beheadings, they're always in this 20-year period of time on the upswing and then the downswing behind the peak or the zenith of a we generation. Well, we hit the peak or the zenith of the we generation in 2023, which means from 2013 through 2023 at the peak, and then from 2023 through 2033, if there were to be some large-scale world war or civil war, it would be between now and 2033, based on the Pendulum Theory. It's a fascinating book. But we talk about that because the Great Depression, this is ITR's stance, which I think is interesting. The 5 big reasons, number one is demographics. You can't just make more babies out of nowhere, right? We have a shortage of 50-year-olds that are in their peak earning years, paying the most amount in taxes and covering the rising costs of all these different expenditures for the aging boomer population. I call it the silver-haired tsunami. Well, the boomers, the demographic issue is critical. It's not just critical here in America, it's critical in Japan, South Korea, China, Europe, Italy, Germany. There's a lot of countries that are in really bad shape because of demographics. And then there's countries that are going to do very well over the next handful of decades, like India or Sub-Saharan Africa. Their average population's around 28, which they're going to crush it over the upcoming decades. But demographics is like a cruise ship. You can't turn it around instantly. That also is what leads to the other 4 issues, which is going to be obviously government debt. It's ballooning. He's printing more money than Biden, actually. Republicans don't like to talk about that, but he's just as bad. And that's been the case going back for 50 years. So you've got the government debt, you've got inflation. We think inflation is going to continue upwards. I mean, with the dollar being debased, with what's going on in the Middle East, with oil crisis, all of that is going to lead to higher inflation. And we're not talking about the CPI number. I call it the CPI number because it doesn't factor in all these other issues like food and energy and mortgages and rent and things like that. So it's not a real number. It's a manipulated number that's designed to deceive. So you got inflation. Then you've got our healthcare costs. Holy cow, what a disaster that is. I mean, we bring in about $5 trillion in tax revenue a year. By 2028, our tax costs as a country is going to reach over $8 trillion. How are we going to pay for all this? And then fifth and finally, unfunded liabilities. You can look this up on Google. But over the next 75 years, between Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security disability, government pensions, we have somewhere between 150 and 200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. We bring in $5 trillion a year. How are we going to pay for all this? So those 5 things, just from the economic standpoint, let alone what you're talking about, these other forces, the poly crisis, right? Just those 5 things alone are converging, and that's going to take the economy off a cliff. ITR believes there's going to be a 6-year depression from 2030 through 2036, and the recovery period in the stock market is going to be upwards of 18 years. Wow. Which is exactly how long it took the first Great Depression, 25 years to get back to the starting point. I'll end with this. The only thing that would change this time frame, it's not who gets elected next. J.D. Vance is going to save us. No, he's not, actually. These are too big of forces to, some elected official. They're not going to save us. AI is not going to save us. Now, AI may actually help us get out of it sooner, kind of like with World War II, with the manufacturing and innovation. It pulled us out of the Great Depression, but it's not big enough to keep us out of it. We're not going to go back to the gold standard. I love gold and silver. Maybe we talk about it, but there's not enough gold to go back to the gold standard, unfortunately. And not only that, the central bankers will never do that because they have too much power with the fiat currency. So these things are going to converge at one time. The only thing that would change this time frame, Alex, is a world war or a civil war. Because the Great Depression will break out when peace breaks out. This is ITR's stance. And the reason why is when you go into a war, you're printing money like crazy, you're manufacturing like a banshee, your munitions and tanks and planes and all this stuff. And so it's very stimulative to the economy, but you're focused on kicking the enemy's butt. We'll deal with the economic hangover later, but as soon as the war's over, boom, that's when you go into the Great Depression. So if we had some sort of war, which maybe we're in one now, maybe this is a big one, who knows, with Iran, then let's say it lasted 3 years, right? So it's 26, it gets us to 29, then the war ends. Well, that's when we go through the Great Depression. It would actually be moved up. Similarly, if we took the off-ramp, which I'm not very optimistic we're going to find it, but that's another topic. If we took the off-ramp, this is not the big war, but we found ourselves in the big war in 2030 or some sort of civil war, and it lasted 3 years, that could push back the Great Depression until the war's over. And so I asked Tucker Carlson about this in the movie. He's in the movie as well, because World War I was kind of an anomaly. And I want to ask you about this because I asked him the same question. World War I was a little bit different. It wasn't a part of the pendulum theory because World War I was created by the few. The banking situation was in dire straits. The London Stock Exchange had been closed for 5 months leading up to World War I. They were looking for some sort of flashpoint to be able to institute wartime powers, which Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was killed. It's like, well, why do we go to war over that? A world war over some guy in Austro-Hungary? Like, come on, that doesn't. They needed some sort of excuse to print their way out of that mess, and that's exactly what they did. Inflation ensued. They wrote off all the bank losses. We used the Wartime Power Act in the Great Depression, then in the oil crisis, then in 2008, and then during COVID. But the pendulum theory does not talk about proxy wars started by the few or off of oil or stupid things. The pendulum theory is predicting big situations where the masses are ready to go to war, like the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and with World War II after Pearl Harbor, which I think was a false flag personally, that galvanized the Americans and we were all ready to go to war. So my question to you, Alex, is do you think that they may be using this war in Iran as a changing of the subject to divert our attention away from the real financial problems that we're dealing with?
It would certainly be very convenient, Andrew, because right now with the Strait of Hormuz closed, with the LNG exports stopping out of the Persian Gulf, with the oil drying up, the oil supply, that would provide a very convenient excuse for major economic problems, including problems with the food supply. And instead of looking at the institutional factors, the systemic factors that produce that economic crisis, they could say, well, it was because of the war. If we hadn't had the war, we could have continued with this ridiculous fiat system that we have indefinitely. So I think there is a very real concerted effort to get a third world war kicked off. And if you look at the powerful globalist players who've kind of dreamed up a lot of these ideas, they've understood that war is a very useful catalyst to bringing about their agenda. You look, for example, in 1962, the U.S. State Department hired a guy called Lincoln Bloomfield, former intelligence guy, came out of the OSS, the precursor to the CIA, like William Dentzel, to come up with a strategy document. And the purpose of this report was supposed to be to figure out how to move beyond the nation states, the Westphalian system from the 1600s, into a new order where, actually the name of the report gives the whole game away, a world effectively controlled by the United Nations. How do we get from nation states to a global system? And the guy who wrote the report, Lincoln Bloomfield, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, big-time deep stater, concluded in his report that the fastest way, he said organic trends would take hundreds of years to get us where we want to be. But if we use war, the threat of war, and crises, we can accelerate this process very rapidly. And he knew that from experience, right? World War I led to all kinds of institutions being created, most notoriously the League of Nations, which of course was going to be the proto-global government, but the U.S. Senate decided not to join. And so after World War II, we saw the emergence of basically all the architecture of global governance that we know today. The International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, the World Bank, the Bretton Woods system, like all of this emerged in the aftermath of World War II, including, by the way, the regional orders that Lincoln Bloomfield said would be critical to moving this process along. Like in Europe, they foisted on them the European Coal and Steel Community, which very rapidly morphed into the European Economic Community, which became the European Community, which eventually became the European Union superstate that dominates, and that today leading globalists like Henry Kissinger say should be used as the model for regionalizing government around the world, whether we're looking at North America or Southeast Asia or Latin America or Putin's Eurasian Union. All the regions of the world are rapidly moving into these regional governance structures under the guise of free trade. And so they understand that war and economic chaos both help fuel that process that they are very, very much interested in advancing. And so when you look at what's going on in Iran, Iran, I think, could very easily mushroom into a third world war, right? We know that the Russians and the Chinese are helping the Iranians. We know that the Europeans are at least supposed to be helping the United States under various agreements that we've got with them. So this could easily balloon into something much larger. So could Ukraine. So could the Korean Peninsula. So could the Communist Chinese trying to take over the free people of Taiwan. Even India, Pakistan. I was in India last year. I mean, the Indians are gung-ho about it, and so are the Pakistanis. They've got lots of nuclear weapons. So any of these things could very rapidly morph into a third world war. But what I'm curious about, Andrew, we know this stuff. I mean, this stuff isn't like secret. You don't have to break into the smoky rooms to figure this out. I mean, the data you're talking about is publicly available. You can read the Treasury reports explaining that we've got hundreds of trillions in unfunded liabilities and that the debt is unsustainable and that the U.S. government's beyond broke. You can look at the Federal Reserve's monetary data to see that we have an explosion in the creation of new currency, very much like we had during COVID. Like all this stuff should be very easy to find, and yet you will find very few financial advisors, very few people who do what you do, who are willing to talk about this. In your experience, why is that? Are they ignorant? Do they not know? Are they scared? What's going on here? Why won't they talk about this?
Well, it's because it implicates them. I actually was working at Wells Fargo during the GFC, the global financial crisis of 2008. I'll never forget it as long as I live. I probably still have some PTSD from that time. I remember when the Dow Jones dropped 777 points. Usually 777 is a lucky number. It was not that day. That was like the worst drop in Dow Jones history. And I'll never forget, we had this lovely little couple that would come into the branch, and they were in their late 70s, early 80s, and they'd show us pictures of their travels to Europe, and they'd have their grandkids come with them, and they're going to Disneyland. They were pretty wealthy. I think they were, at the time, worth somewhere around $4 million, which today is probably like $8 million with inflation. And they came into the office this one day, And they didn't say hi to the teller line. They just went right over to the guy that I was learning under. I was just brand new, dipping my toes into the investment world, but the guy that I was learning under was big time. And he, was managing this couple's money. And they went right over, didn't have an appointment. I thought a physical fight was gonna break out because they had lost about 30% of their money, and when it was all said and done, 50% before it started recovering. They were so mad. And I was like, dude, what do we do? Do we call the cops? I mean, these are good clients, what do we do? When you go through something like that, that's one microcosm of many. And it doesn't matter if they were across the street, they would have lost the same amount of money, period. But it's one thing when your accounts get cut in half. It's another thing when your accounts are out and out taken. And this is where advisors, they bury their head in the sand. They have ostrich syndrome. They don't even want to think about that, because here's the thing. Even if you lost all of your money, all of your clients' money was cut in half. If you lost half of all of your clients' money, they still can log in and see their accounts. Oh shoot, Tesla got cut in half, but I can still see my Tesla stock, right? It's still gonna come back. I gotta wait a little longer, but I can still see it. When they log in and they see nothing, oh man, that's very different. You have $1 billion assets under management and 500 million of it is gone. I'm not saying that I would do this, but there will be many people who show up to your house with a gun. If you're an advisor, then you lost their money. And it wasn't your fault, but they're gonna blame you. So you're the one that's gonna take the fall as an advisor. Now, as an advisor, you don't even wanna think about that. You don't even want to entertain that. And if this is true, if you have any shred of integrity, what do you do about it? Do you go and fight it? Do you reallocate all of your clients' money and hurt your bottom line? In fact, pretty much take it away? Do you have to fundamentally restructure your entire business model that you've spent a decade or 2 or 3 building? These are hard questions for a financial advisor. But those are the questions we have to ask ourselves. If this is true, and if my client's money is vulnerable of being taken, what am I gonna do about it? And that's why I went and I fought on your behalf, on everybody's behalf, because we have to get these things. That's why I spent $1 million of my own money to make this movie. Now we're gonna recover some of it on the back end, don't get me wrong, it's a business decision, but I still had to front the money because when I learned this is serious, this is sinister. And until people understand, there are certain things you can do to protect your money, whether it's in an IRA, and it's not all gold and silver, that's part of it, we believe in that. But there are things that you can do to protect yourselves. You still need the estate plan and the tax planning and the long-term care and Medicare and Social Security and income and all that. You need that, but how do you protect it from the vulnerabilities of housing your money in any sort of custodian or bank? And that's where a lot of advisors scratch their heads and they don't know. But we found it out. We figured out, oh wow, there are carve-outs. There are ways where your money is not pulled through the DTC, which by the way, is owned by a company called CEDE Co, CEDE, which comes from the word secede or to separate from. I mean, come on guys. It's like if it's not just right in our face, they do that. They're so arrogant. There's so much hubris. But anyway, there are ways where you can protect yourself, but most advisors don't even want to deal with it. The mothership that they're under won't let them. And you need somebody who's willing to take a stand. Julie Auk out of South Dakota, she has a financial background. She has financial clients, and she actually went and fought on behalf of you and I in South Dakota to try to get this bill amended, Uniform Commercial Code. And she's told me that she's actually trying to do certain things within her practice, within her financial practice, to insulate her clients from this, because she has a conviction that this is real, this is serious. But what do you do? And that's where education comes in, it's where taking action at the local level comes in, and it's where preparation comes in to protect your money. You are not powerless. You have ways that you can protect yourself, but don't procrastinate. Oh, this is a hard subject to understand, I'm just gonna pretend everything's gonna be okay. That's the normalcy bias. Everything's been good, everything is semi-good today, therefore everything has to and will always be good. Wow, that is so dangerous. There's that proverb, we have it at the beginning of the movie. Solomon mentioned it twice. A prudent man or woman foresees calamity and prepares himself for it, but the simple move forward and get punished or wiped out. So be prudent. You have the autonomy, you have the latitude to make some changes if we know that this is coming, and it is coming. So as we kind of get close to tying a bow on this, I've got a couple last questions for you, Alex. So from your perspective as a journalist, you've covered these types of things at a national level. How much does the individual constituent actually make a difference amongst legislators in their district? So if they get, if they go to, and I don't know if you want, if it's okay, I promote it, but ismymoneyprotected.com is how we can actually get our legislators to do something. We have frameworks, templates that you can copy and paste, what to email, what to text, what to mail, and there's a map there where you can find your local legislator. Because here's the thing, I'm in Nashville, but if I go to Knoxville and I reach out to some legislator in Knoxville, they're gonna I don't care, they're gonna hang up on me because you have no power in my district. They want the people who are their voters. So you have to reach out to your legislator in your district. But do you actually believe that we could make enough of a difference at the local level if we just peppered these guys and wore them out, right? Do you think that we could actually create some change here?
I have no doubt that we could make change, Andrew, if enough people woke up and became active. You mentioned Representative Julie Auch. I actually had her on one of my programs to discuss. She was the first lawmaker to file a bill to try to deal with this, to try to protect the rights of not just her constituents, but the people of her state, South Dakota, from this looming great taking. And she said at first people were really enthusiastic about it. But on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats were really excited. They didn't realize this was a problem. Once they found out about it, they wanted to do something. But then the bank lobbyists came in, and I know you ran into them in Tennessee, and they started their behind-the-scenes maneuvering and threatening campaign contributions and primary opponents and the behind-the-shadows arm twisting that we know goes on in legislatures. And a lot of these politicians, and they are politicians, they're not statesmen, they're politicians, they looked out at the horizon and they said, these lobbyists have more power than my constituents. My constituents don't know about this. My constituents don't care about it. The bank lobby really cares about it. They've got a lot of money. They looked at the situation. They said, I'm better off going with the bank lobby than with my constituents, because what my constituents don't know isn't going to come up in the next election cycle. If that were to change, if people were to watch this documentary, if people were to read the articles and the books that have been put out about this, and there were to be a groundswell of public concern about this issue, lawmakers would absolutely respond to that. I work with a lot of lawmakers. I brief lawmakers. I have members of Congress on my show, members of the U.S. Senate on my show on a regular basis, and I get the opportunity to talk to them behind the scenes, and they will tell you that if they were to get 5 phone calls to their office, they're paying attention, right? Because your average American doesn't even know their congressman's name, much less the name of their state representative. When they start getting multiple phone calls or multiple emails on one issue, they pay attention because they know every phone call represents hundreds, if not thousands, of fellow constituents who feel the same way. So if we got enough people to start making the phone calls, start setting up appointments to visit with their state senator or their state representative, we could, I believe, make this stop. And it would only take, I think, a few states to say, hey, we're not going to allow this, for all the other states to say, well, we're not either. We're not going to be the dumb guys that allow our constituents to be robbed by the big banks. That's not going to be a good political position to be in. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, nobody wants to be looted. Right? So I think the key here is just awareness. If we can raise enough awareness through the different things that you and I are both working on, I don't think it's too late to make change. But it is going to take effort. You can't just sit around on your couch and watch the football game and expect other people to do it for you. If you're listening to us, you're the one I'm talking to. You need to get involved. You need to call your representative. You need to call your senator. You need to understand this issue. And yes, you want to protect yourself. Yes, you want to protect your assets. Yes, you want to help your family protect themselves. But on a broader level, you have an obligation to get involved. We, the people, are still ostensibly in charge here. And so it's not enough to just protect our money and say, well, let the world go to hell in a handbasket. No, we don't want that. We don't want our neighbors to be harmed. We don't want the people in our communities to be harmed. So we have an obligation, I think, to get involved, and legislators will respond to that. I guarantee it.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. And that's the point, is if we can get enough eyeballs on this issue in a simple way, because these fat cat attorneys, man, they make it so unbelievably complicated that the average person, their eyes glaze over and they're like, I don't know what any of this means. And they're like, I'll just leave this for the smart people. That's exactly the wrong way to deal with this. We need to get involved. That's why I did the movie. That's why we have the websites. We want people to simply understand it so that they can copy and paste and send it to their legislator. And let's get this problem solved. I'm actually, as we wrap up, I am optimistic. I'm optimistic even in the event that the Uniform Commercial Code in Article 8 is not amended. I'm still bullish. I'm optimistic on America. I do believe we're going to go through a Great Depression. However, more millionaires and billionaires will be made during this time than any other time in our lifetimes. Massive opportunities if you're prepared. And that's the thing, you've got to get prepared. And so I'm optimistic. I think America is going to get through this. We're going to take our lumps. It's going to be painful, but I am on the other end of this. I believe there's going to be a tremendous amount of fruit. There's going to be some pruning for sure. We need it. But I think that this is going to work out in our favor. It's going to work out for our good. It's going to work out for our children's good. But there's going to be some rough times ahead. And we need to be ready. And so thank you so much, Alex, for this conversation. I appreciate the work you're doing. I can't wait to read your brand new book and promote it on the website. And it's always great to see you.
Thank you, Andrew. The feeling is mutual. Thanks for this conversation. Really enjoyed it. I'll look forward to talking to you more. And folks, if you have not seen the documentary yet, go check it out. It's huge. So thanks again, Andrew.